Hi, I'm David Marchant, the founder of OffshoreAlert, which investigates participants in high-value cross-border finance with an emphasis on high-confidentiality jurisdictions. Our specialty is exposing investment fraud while it's in progress. Enjoy our content.
Well, hello everybody. Greetings from Sydney, Australia. It's my pleasure to be with you all today, all over the world, I understand. Today I'm going to present on crypto swindle kings. These are the new breed of cyber criminals that have been out there terrorising the world for the past years. And I'm going to speak about the emergence of cryptocurrency fraud, something that I've been heavily involved in for the past 10 years. My name's Ken Gamble. And I'll give you a little bit of background about who I am and who IFW Global is before we start. IFW Global is a private intelligence group. Essentially, we are licensed by the New South Wales government and also the Florida government. We have an office in Miami, an office in Sydney, and a couple of other offices in Southeast Asia and also the UK. We specialise in cybercrime, and we've taken a huge interest in cybercrime over the past decade, and these days we're often seen busting big cybercrime groups, particularly in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. My personal background is an investigator. I've started 32 years ago, and I spent 15 years of my career in surveillance work. I'm an expert witness on cybercrime in the Australian courts, and I've worked extensively around the world, more than 40 countries. Lived in the United States, also Germany, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. I spent about 5 years overseas living in foreign countries. I've also received some law enforcement awards for my work in the Philippines, smashing criminal gangs that are involved in fraud, piracy, counterfeiting of drugs, all types of things. And over the years, managed to build up a very extensive network of contacts around the world. So today's talk, we're going to look at the multi-billion-dollar crypto investment fraud industry. A lot of this industry is very well organised, which I know some of you are very aware of that. These are not random crimes that are occurring. These are very highly organised. So we're going to have a look at some of the ways that these crimes are committed. Also, how organised is it? And who's behind these crypto scams, and also why aren't they being caught, and why aren't we seeing a lot more arrests and prosecutions of these criminals? Now, when we look at the media, now I don't know about you, but I have Google alerts on my computer. I like to know whenever there's a big bust of something. I like to know when a crypto gang gets caught. So I'm often monitoring the news headlines. And one of the things that I have noticed recently in the headlines, and you'll see a couple of headlines here today, is that law enforcement agencies around the world are pleading for help. You can see here in a headline, Albanian gangs take up cryptocurrencies. We need a new approach, says police. Scotland Yard's pleading for help as foreign gangs turn to crypto. Now, I spent a lot of time talking to law enforcement agencies, and I can tell you now, they need a lot of help. This is not something that any law enforcement agency can deal with individually. This is something that has become a global problem, and it needs a global approach and a multi-dimensional approach, which up until recently is not being done. So these headlines tell a compelling story about the fact that law enforcement have lost the battle, and we need to step up now and find new ways on how to fight this insidious type of crime which is spreading across the world. The type of crypto scams, I'm not going to go into all these today because there are so many, but I'm going to talk about some of the big ones here, and that is mainly the big frauds. You'll see fraudulent ICOs. I know that most of you will be well aware of these types of crimes, but these are just a few of the big ones, I suppose, some of the main ones. The Bitcoin wealth creation scams are probably the most profitable, although fraudulent ICOs have a habit of raking in billions of dollars also in criminal profits. But I would say that the Bitcoin wealth creation scams are certainly what we're seeing from an investigation point of view, working on the front line. We're seeing these types of scam operations making literally billions of dollars, and they've become so industrialized that it's become, almost a state-sponsored operation in some countries, because there's this whole level of criminality mixed with commercial business, and it's very difficult for foreign governments to work out who's who in the zoo, as they say. So the international cybercrime operations that we look at, and the ones that we're investigating right now in conjunction with some major law enforcement agencies, tend to be very smart. They're very clever. These people are compartmentalizing their operations, meaning that they're setting up and operating in numerous different countries around the world. So they may have a call center in Ukraine and the Philippines. They may have banking operations in Mauritius and Singapore or Hong Kong. They may have management sitting in Israel or in other parts of Eastern Europe that are actually controlling the operation. Their IT security department are going to be sitting in even another country again. So you've got this incredible state-of-the-art technology that's behind these criminals. And these people are involved in massive securities. You'll see the Jerry Shalon picture there. Some of you will be aware of Jerry Shalon and his network. These are all Israelis. This is an Israeli phenomenon, and I'll talk about that more later in my presentation, about why this has become an Israeli phenomenon. And a lot of these people have close links to political figures, government bodies. You'll see that Jerry Shalon's father was a member of parliament in the country of Georgia. So you've got all these people that are running these incredibly large organisations that are making a lot of money, and they have these connections which are not necessarily involved in the criminal activity, but you can understand when these people do get caught that there's going to be influence to get them out of jail. Now, the cryptocurrency fraudsters that we're seeing, some of them are so sophisticated that they are doing target profiling. They're actually looking at the targets that they are going to target in a country, say, like Australia, and they will actually study the government publications on statistical data to identify the most vulnerable victims. Now, that sounds pretty cruel, and it is. It is cruel. They are finding out who are the most vulnerable people in our society, which usually are, men and women from 40 to 60-year-old, or even older. And what they're doing is they're finding out who are the best people to target, and they're actually design their campaign specifically to target these types of vulnerable people. And this is something that we're seeing. We've had insiders tell us how all this works, so we've got quite a lot of intelligence on how they're actually doing this. Now, we're going to talk briefly about Facebook celebrity Bitcoin scams. We've investigated a few of these, and we've got them right back to the source of where they come from. These scams are heavily marketed on Facebook, and they come from call centers. They send text messaging, direct email notification, adverts. Some of you have probably seen these. They're very, very compelling. And I'm going to show you a brief video clip in a second, just about how they've edited all these celebrity videos together, and they've put this video on their scam site so that victims will land on this page and then get completely sucked in with all the rubbish that they're hearing. But these are real people. These are the Richard Bransons of the world, very famous people talking about Bitcoin, and they use this as their presentation video to lure someone into a platform. So we're going to have a look now at this video. It just goes for 53 seconds.
Inflation, these are the potential perks of this thing called
we're going to see the video.
Bitcoin. But is Bitcoin really the money of the future? Bitcoin. All the rage, but what the hell is it?
Bitcoin is better than currency. There's a big industry around Bitcoin, and people have made fortunes out of Bitcoin.
Right. The technical answer in Bitcoins is that Bitcoins is a remarkable cryptographic achievement. It is a huge deal. It's a huge, huge, huge deal.
If people have got lots of Bitcoins and they want to go to space, I'd much rather they spent that money on our spaceship.
I mean, I personally, I own Bitcoin in my hedge fund. I own Bitcoin in my fund. I own Bitcoin in my private account.
Okay, so there you have it. That's you know, you can see the level of sophistication that these people have gone to and the trouble they've gone to in order to convince people that Bitcoin's great. Well, Bitcoin is great, but it's not great to invest in when it's being spruiked by a criminal organisation in a foreign country. Now let's look at how they target people on cell phones. Now most of us use cell phones. Just about everyone in the world are using cell phones these days. What they're doing is they're sending links to cell phones straight to your text message, straight to your phone by text message, and they will direct you to a website, and that website will then take you on this incredible marketing ride. Congratulations, this is who I am, this is how wealthy I've become, and it takes the victim through this this short presentation of screenshots of wealth and all these incredible pictures, giving someone that real sense of wealth. And it's quite amazing how many people fall for this. This is just one of the slides blowing up here. You'll see that they say that your account will be immediately managed by a recommended broker. So that's when the boiler room guys comes in. That's when they ring you up and they start talking, and they will then get you into bigger and bigger deals. So the idea is they start slow and then they build you up into bigger and bigger deals. And again, I'm going to show you another quick video here as to just how compelling these videos are.
You're here. I'm glad you finally made it. Hi, I'm John Becker. You're here because you received a private invitation from a friend of mine who thinks very highly of you. These invitations have only gone out to a select few. In fact, you're one of only 25 people to be given the chance to make life-changing profits like this. Now, hold on a sec. Before you click away from this page thinking, I've heard this before, or not this again, let me just warn you that this is not going to be another one of those scam videos showing a couple of fake trades. Yes, I've fallen for the scams too. It's always the same push-button system, right? Make millions in your sleep, or the 3-second millionaire. These days, there are scams everywhere you turn, just lurking around every corner of the internet, waiting to pounce.
So there you have it. You can see the level of sophistication that they put into the marketing of these videos, and a lot of people fall for it. Let's have a look at who's behind this particular video clip and the daily profit. We've traced this to a group in Ukraine. These are Israeli kingpins that are operating big operations. Ukraine has become one of the centers of these types of operations, and the people that are running these scams are extremely wealthy, more wealthier than any of us will ever become in our lifetimes. These people are in a different world than what we can ever imagine. The amount of money that they're making, we'll have a look at some of those in more detail as we move through. One of our investigations has uncovered what we have termed a university of fraud in Ukraine. There's 100 trainees a week going through a training school to learn how to work on as customer service on crypto platforms. Now, these people are recruited, a lot of them from Africa. As long as they speak good English, they will usually get a job. They get salaries of $400 a month, and they're protected by local crime bosses. And there's been an influx of these people coming into Ukraine in recent years. They're targeting all nationalities, all languages, all over the world. This is actually some photos inside an operation. We've been running operations in Ukraine for some time. We've had undercover operatives infiltrate some of these operations. We've got photographs inside. This gives you an idea. These buildings are huge. Some of these buildings are like 4 or 5 stories high, filled with people that are running these operations. There's no signage on the doors. No one has a clue about what these guys are actually doing, but they're all running crypto platforms targeting people all over the world. Now, the money, how the money's laundered, we see money being laundered, not traded on the platform for a start. The money's actually not traded at all. The money's stolen. The money gets put through, these days, crypto exchanges. So it gets laundered to many different crypto exchanges, a lot of the regulated ones initially, and then it gets put into unregulated crypto exchanges, ones that the US government and other governments can't penetrate and can't get access to information. So then the money gets laundered from an unregulated crypto exchange to a foreign bank account in a country like Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, and the money's taken out in cash and it's transported often by road to the masterminds and then distributed. So, you know, the traditional way of tracing money in these cases doesn't work. This is a group. Now, I'm going to get the video played here while I'm speaking to you, and I'll just explain what's happening. This is an organisation involving 1,000 members. This is a gang involving 1,000 people with 3 call centres operating for 2 years in the Philippines, making $1 million per day for 2 years. Now, this is a huge operation, the largest operation that we've ever seen in the Philippines, and we've busted a few of these, but this is the biggest. This was run by Israelis from Israel. There was only 8 Israeli managers inside the operation when police busted the doors down in June of 2018. And these people, these 8 Israelis were arrested, of course. They were all taken back and charged with cybercrime. Unbelievably, none of these people were prosecuted. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. But these Israelis got away with it. Now, one would ask how? Because of the complexity of this crime and the lack of sophistication of the Philippines National Police. These guys, even though they have an anti-cybercrime group with something like 160 men and women, they still lack the sophistication to go up against a very high-tech, state-of-the-art criminal group like these guys. So they were way above their punching weight, as they say, in this particular case. These Israelis knew at the time the police went in the door that they would probably be released, and they were. And I'll just, the lady that's being interviewed, she's Australian. She's one of the Australian victims, one of the group of victims that got conned. These people took about $600,000 from Australians. They ultimately settled the case, and they actually walked away without any conviction. And the story behind that is one of quite astonishment as to how these people got out of the country. I'll just go on to the next the next slide, where you've got 2 articles here that appeared in the national newspapers. 7th of June, 8 Israelis arrested in the Philippines for a multi-billion-dollar online scam. Now, this made the headlines in the UK and in Israel, and of course, everyone was rubbing their hands together, saying, "Great, they've got one of these big groups." Unfortunately, just 1 week later, on the 14th of June, the Israelis were freed, and they subsequently were escorted out of the country, and they were sent back to Israel without prosecution. So the rest of the story, I'm happy to talk anytime offline, but that just goes to show that even when you catch these people, sometimes you can't even prosecute them because of the complexity of the evidence and the difficulty in trying to pin the crime to these people. Let's talk about where these crypto gangs come from. I'll give you a little bit of a history lesson. Some of you may have heard of the binary options empire of scams that lasted for, I guess it was a reign of terror for about a decade. These were the biggest cyber crimes in the world. The wolves of Tel Aviv, they were labelled by the media. It was an industry turning over between $5 to $10 billion a year, according to the FBI. It absolutely devastated victims across the world. We're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of victims. Now, the first one to admit that Israel had a problem was the Israeli government. The Israeli government announced in about 2017 that Israeli organised crime in Israel in relation to these cyber gangs had risen to monstrous proportions. And that's not an understatement. The police essentially publicly stated, we have lost the battle. Israeli crime kingpins are the ones that are behind the binary options industry, that these crime groups have been massively enriched and strengthened as a result of the failure of law enforcement for many years to grasp the vastness of the problem. Well, guess what? Now that they outlawed binary options in Israel, all these gangs have now gone into crypto. This is the head of the Israeli Securities Authority, saying that binary options were like blood diamonds. Now you can say the same thing now about cryptocurrency, and cryptocurrency scams is just like blood diamonds in the mining process that exploited and harmed so many people. We must expand our enforcement capabilities to eliminate this sort of trading. The common belief of tens of countries around the globe is that the authorities are turning a blind eye, but that's actually not true. This is actually way above their capabilities, and they need help from all the international agencies around the world in order to fight this massive criminal enterprise. The crimes, as I said, are state of the art. There's been one particular journalist, Simona Weinglass, who's done a terrific job in exposing this type of crime in Israel. She's a very brave woman. She's been the victim of death threats, and I know that a lot of journalists that try and expose this are threatened by these criminal groups because of their power and influence. And Israel did state 3 years ago that cryptocurrency may be the next big Israeli scam. Well, guess what? Cryptocurrency is the next big Israeli scam. So let's turn our attention to the US and what have the FBI been doing about this? Well, the FBI are the only agency in the world, I think, that's taken. Well, actually, they're not the only agency. They're the only agency that have taken action against the victims in America. So when these groups target the US victims, they're crossing onto US soil. They're branching into the world of committing offences in the US, and this is something that that the FBI take very seriously. Now, this lady here, her name is Lee Albers. She became the first shameful public face of the binary options industry. She's been sentenced to 22 years in prison, $145 million fraud. You know, the greed of this woman and all the people that that she worked with at UCOM Communications is difficult to fathom. It is unbelievable that people can be so greedy and so ruthless and leave so many victims in financial ruin along the way. But this lady is now serving in prison with a long time to consider all those victims that she defrauded. This is a brief snapshot of the UCOM binary options network. A lot of these people are still operating. The ones that are not in prison are operating cryptocurrency scams. You'll see that you've got these, as I mentioned, compartmentalized operations, boiler rooms, the ones on the phone doing the calls. You've got your brand operators. They're trading under all different types of names. You've got your payment services, which also happen to be Israelis. It's an Israeli phenomenon because of the technology. These people are light years ahead of law enforcement, and they've been winning the game up until now. This is one of the Israeli crime bosses behind UCOM. His name is Yossi Herzog. Some of you probably heard of him. He was indicted by a grand jury last year in February, and a superseding indictment in September. Now this guy is I guess the John Gotti of binary options. He was a person that had set up operations all over the world and actually boasted about it and was quite proud of the fact that he had operations in Australia and all the rest of it. Now he would have told you that all of his business is legitimate, all his forex trading is legitimate, but of course it wasn't legitimate. A lot of it was just scams. Mr. Herzog has gone into hiding now, and nobody knows where he is. But we can probably be pretty sure that he's in a country that has no extradition treaty. And one of these countries is a country that is a haven for these types of crimes. Now, I mentioned earlier the Ukraine, and the Ukraine, which I spoke about, has become an absolute haven for these criminal groups, as well as the Philippines. So the Philippines, being a third world country and being a place where it's quite easy to do business there, and it's a very poor country, it's very easy to bribe police officers and so forth. Unfortunately, the Philippines has become another hotbed for this type of organised crime, and we have been running operations in the Philippines for years. We've busted a lot of these big syndicates before, but you know what? A week later, they're back in operation again. You put them in jail. The masterminds just recruit a whole lot of new people to come in. There's not really a focus and concentrated effort by law enforcement, and there's no real joint efforts going on that I'm aware of, that I'm seeing, and that's part of the problem. And then once we do see those joint efforts, we're going to see people like Yossi Herzog and all of these guys hopefully prosecuted. This is another one, Yakov Cohen. Again, the type of young, I suppose young, successful looking in the eyes of their peers. These people are very successful. They are very wealthy. These people fly around in private jets, their own private jets. They have their own mansions. They have all the luxury toys that one could imagine that wealthy people would have. But instead of retiring in their operations, they will continue to conduct this type of work because it is so financially lucrative. Cohen and others, from a 3-year period, from 2014 to 2017, they operated the websites Binary Book and bigoption.com. So what these are is trading platforms. They're forex trading platforms, and they look real. When you go on, they're incredibly slick, very sophisticated, and very, very enticing. When you put money into them, you see your money go up, you see your trades winning. It's a very sophisticated scam. What they do is they manipulate the back end of the trading platform, and eventually, at their will, they can make you lose your trades. But remember, your money's not really trading in the platform because it's already been stolen. There has been some raids in Ukraine, not on the operations that we're looking at, but there has been, last year, there was an operation against a group called the Milton Group. Now, this is a group that we're very familiar with. Jacob Kesselman, he was one of the people involved in this group. Now, this is one group. Now, we know that there are hundreds of groups in the Ukraine, and some of them are very large. This is one group. This guy took €65 million, which is, what's that, 80 million US dollars in 1 year in sales. Now, that's a pretty good business. I don't make that much money. Now, a lot of their payments from clients were coming in small amounts. So what they would do is they'd scam a small client for $250. Now, that client that loses $250 or $1 million or even $10,000 is actually not going to go to much trouble to pursue once they lose that money and they think it's a scam. They're not going to go to any trouble to try and make a complaint. And even if they did, what are the police going to say? Well, you put your money into a trading platform and you lost it. You want us to investigate and it's in another country? No way. So they've got a business model that really works. It's very, very clever because no police will investigate these crimes. And no police have the will, the motivation, or the resources to uncover or unravel the length and breadth of these operations. Well, when I say no police, that's probably not a fair thing to say. There are some police that have done it as a result of big claims, but I'm talking about the smaller ones that are still in operation, that are not necessarily coming under the radar of law enforcement. Some of the bigger ones that do get busted because they get greedy. This particular operation was using a Cyprus. Now, Cyprus is another haven for these Israeli gangs. They're everywhere there. We've got operations running in Cyprus at the moment. But these people used an online credit card merchant company in Cyprus called Naspay, which itself advertises itself as a state-of-the-art payment gateway owned by a person called David Todua. Now, these payment platforms and these payment gateways, as I mentioned earlier, the money moves so quickly through these gateways and these merchants that it's really difficult to get a handle on where the money ends up, because it's moving around to many different countries and it's moving around very quickly. And you need a multi-jurisdictional approach in order to try and track that money, because you're dealing with all these different sort of boutique credit card merchant companies, and a lot of these are also Israeli owned. So it's no secret that these people are tapping into their own infrastructure. We know that these Israelis are buying into telecommunications infrastructure. They are buying and setting up crypto exchanges. We know that they're buying into the infrastructure in the Philippines. They're buying BPO companies that have hundreds and hundreds of call centers. We know that they're buying into VoIP communication companies. We know of one operation that was purchased for $100 million by these criminals, so that they can use these VoIP systems to essentially bypass the traditional telecommunications networks that are monitored and regulated. Let's have a brief talk about the dilemma of law enforcement. I know I've touched on it, and it's something that I have to experience as a frontline investigator on a regular basis. In fact, I'm very pleased and honoured to announce that we have started working with the AFP for the first time in the history of my profession. We've started working hand in hand, and the Australian Federal Police and other agencies such as the FBI, HSI, even the US Secret Service, they're all getting involved now in investigating these types of crypto scams. They realise that this is big business, but there's still a dilemma within the lower ranks of law enforcement. And the biggest, most common problems there, I've made a list. It's out of the jurisdiction. It's impossible to prove fraud. They don't have any resources. It's not our problem. You know, this is something we're hearing to this day from state police forces. For example, I live in Australia. I deal with state police forces. One of them is the New South Wales Police Force, which I deal with because I live in New South Wales, and I'm licensed by the New South Wales Police. So I have to refer cases procedurally through the New South Wales Police. And yet these type of crimes that I investigate, they won't investigate. So they won't even keep the case open. They will close the case and say that we are not going to look at this case because we don't investigate these crimes in another country. Even though there's a victim in New South Wales that's just lost their superannuation, we are not going to do it. And I've got, you know, victim impact statements. I've got, you know, tale after tale from victims who have given these victim impact statements about why our state agencies can't do it. And it's not really a problem with the police themselves. They do a great job. It's actually the system. And we've got a criminal enterprise out there that's actually defeating the system that our governments were set up for. And that is the law enforcement system that was set up to operate in a jurisdictional environment. These crooks have worked out a way how to beat the system, and they've been beating it for more than a decade, and getting away with it. You know, almost rubbing it into the noses of the governments that are trying to come after them. So we're finding there are a pocket of agencies that are showing a great interest in this, and one of them is the AFP. We're also We know that the FBI and HSI are very active. We know that the US Secret Service have shown an interest also in getting involved in these types of investigations. But the FBI have been very active, particularly over the past few years, in actually prosecuting these groups that are targeting US victims. The other thing, a lot of these groups now no longer target US victims. So the US is off the, it's what they call a do not call list. They are no longer targeting US victims because they know that if they do, the FBI is going to come after them. So a lot of these people will actually instruct their callers and their marketers and their affiliate marketers not to go after US victims. Some of them are still stupid and they do it, but they set themselves up in a faraway country like Georgia, which is close to Russia, the country of Georgia, not the state of Georgia. They will set themselves up in a very far away foreign place if they are going to target America. But usually it's operators or criminal masterminds that don't yet understand that the US government will clamp down very, very hard on their operation if they come after Americans. We actually have similar laws in Australia, but we don't use them so much. Although the AFP hopefully will change that in the near future, but we are seeing, we have Commonwealth offences just like the US has wire fraud, and these people commit wire fraud when they engage in a fraud against a US victim. Well, in Australia, we have Commonwealth jurisdiction, Commonwealth offences, and fraud, financial fraud, is one of them. We don't have wire fraud as such. We should have. Maybe that's something that our government should be considering. But we do have laws, and we have Commonwealth offences that can be used to prosecute people in foreign countries and potentially bring these people back to Australia to face prosecution. As a private agency, we deal with victims, and I'm a great victim advocate. I see myself as a person who speaks out on behalf of victims, and that I guess I put myself in the front line on behalf of victims because they can't fight against these criminal groups. They're too frightened, they're too stressed, and they're too ashamed. And what we're seeing across the world, not just in Australia, not just in the US, but right across the world, we're seeing only a very small amount of victims actually reporting the cases. Now, there's been a lot of research conducted on this. I know that in the UK, only a third of elderly victims of crypto fraud were actually reporting it. So that means 33% of all of those people out there that are being defrauded are actually reporting their frauds. Now, out of the 33%, I would say we would have to be very lucky if 1% of those cases were actually investigated. The UK has a very similar problem to Australia. They are overwhelmed with these types of complaints, thousands of complaints a month. All they can do is sit back and collect all the intelligence. And one day we hope that they'll know what to do with it. But the victims of these crimes, I don't know if any of you have had a family member or somebody that's been a victim. I certainly have dealt with thousands of victims in my 30-year career. Recently, though, I'm kind of seeing a new wave of victims coming out, and they are people that are losing huge amounts of money. And I'm talking millions of dollars. Some of these people get so sucked in to what they believe is real that they will actually put in their entire superannuation. They will put in their entire financial nest egg into what they believe is some sort of legitimate, get wealth scheme, or it might be an investment into cryptocurrency. Maybe they've purchased a bunch of Bitcoin, but they haven't actually really got the Bitcoins. They think they have. They think they're holding the Bitcoin in one of these platforms, but what actually happens is they don't really have it. The whole thing is a sophisticated scam, and all the documentation that they have is false, is fake. And we've got case after case after case of what this crime is doing to victims. And I think this is where I suppose it really comes back on the government to, well, you know, is the government responsible for trying to protect members of their own country? And the answer is yes. I mean, we protect our citizens from any type of crime. We're supposed to. So why are we not protecting them from this type of crime? This type of crime in Australia has made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars from victims, if not billions of dollars. I can tell you now that there are thousands and thousands of Australians who have fallen victim to these scams and have absolutely nowhere to turn except coming to an agency like IFW Global that has some experience in investigating these cases. When they go to local law enforcement, they got no hope at all in trying to get any type of traction with their investigation. So we sit in a very good position because we're seeing the victims. We're getting the victims to come forward. We're helping them to make complaints, but we're also seeing the law enforcement side, and we're actually taking. I suppose we're sitting in the middle, you know, bringing these victims forward and closing that gap that has been there for so long. And that's the reason why I give these talks, is because there is a huge gap in between victims of these types of crimes and law enforcement. And I have been a great advocate of working with law enforcement, working with foreign governments, creating partnerships with foreign-based law enforcement agencies. We have operations on foot right now with HSI. We're sharing intelligence with FBI. We've been out there in the trenches for years, many, many years, and we have an enormous amount of intelligence that we have gathered, millions of documents, millions of pieces of data that we have gathered from the field against criminal groups that are now involved in cryptocurrency scams. And some of these are very large-scale operations, and they stretch across the world. There are certain hot pockets, but the partnerships that we are creating are to fill that gap, that shortfall, that gap that I just spoke about between victims and between our government and law enforcement agencies and the politicians that are put there to protect our citizens, whether it be Americans, Germans, English, British, South Africans, French, you name it. We all have the same issues, and we all need the same protection from our governments. So I believe that by cooperating and talking at events like this, we're going to create partnerships that would enhance recovery. Now, recovery is getting the money back for the victims. So on that note, I'm going to finish up my talk, which I think I've got about 1 minute left. My contact details are there. If anybody would like to get in contact with me to discuss any aspects of my talk today, I would certainly welcome contact. I do travel quite a bit. I do talk at the odd event. I thank you, David, and all the team at OffshoreAlert for having me back again. I've spoken at a few of these events before in London and Miami, and it's nice to be able to do it virtually for a change and not have to travel to America, but I do enjoy traveling to Miami. So on that note, I wish you all the best, and I hope you have an enjoyable rest of the conference today, and I will hand you back to the conference organiser, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to our investigative news and documents service and attending our events. For more information, visit offshorealert.com.